The following transmission contains unencrypted instances of explicit language. Mature audiences are cleared to proceed.
Shall we begin? Let's begin.
During his imprisonment by French authorities, Saadi Yassef wrote his memoir about his time as an Algerian freedom fighter. His story is encapsulated within a script that also features a French perspective on the conflict, and the resulting film comes to theaters in 1966. I'm Todd.
And I'm Dave, and we like to talk about spy movies.
No less a personage than Stanley Kubrick once said that you really can't understand what cinema is capable of without seeing the Battle of Algiers, and that's the topic of this episode of Spies Like Us. So this was an interesting find for us, and I want to talk about just a little bit about like why we're doing this movie. Our last movie that we covered was The Day of the Jackal, and not so much from what I saw in the film, but just doing the research on some of the things that were like behind the events of that film really got me psyched up about trying to learn more about the SDECE. And that's, we'll talk about them in a second. Dave, you brought this movie up because why?
I was reading this book called Tonight We Bombed the U.S. Capitol. It was about M19, which is the first all-women terrorist organization. They were kind of an offshoot of the Weatherman Group and the BLA. The book mentioned the Battle of Algiers. The author had talked about it, that they had learned a lot of their, terrorist craft from the Battle of Algiers. And the author also mentioned that both insurgents and terrorists, as well as government security officials, look to this film as like a reference for like, this is how you do it. And since, last time we did our anniversary episode, but before that we did The Day of the Jackal, and that was another this is how you do it type of movie. There's tons and tons of stuff to look at as from a tradecraft's perspective.
Okay, cool. Let's get into it. This is a 1966 film. It is very historic. We're going to talk about the detail of the historic nature of this film in the events that it portrays, with the exception that some of the characters have been renamed, and some characters might be amalgams. I've never been 100% sure. Amalgams. I like that. Yeah, let's go with that one. Of historic figures. Featured agencies, we're going to see the FLN, which is the Algerian National Liberation Front. The French counterinsurgents are never identified except as paratroopers, which is a little weird because they don't actually do any paratrooping in this film. But I guess maybe they did some paratrooping during World War II, maybe, or maybe it's just to signify that they are like the elite of the French fighters. Now, the SDECE, based on what I've read on Wiki, I am so keen to find more movies that deal with these guys. This is the French intelligence agency that rose from the World War II French resistance versus Hitler. Between World War II and our events here, which I think start in 1954-ish, pretty sure that's right, they're said to have done all sorts of like really shady like stuff, like the kind of stuff we hear about like in our worst Cold War stories about CIA bullshit. Like these guys sound like that plus a slice of apple pie. or I guess a crepe in this.
yeah. A crepe a la mode.
They don't get explicitly named in the film, but I think that if you, if you do your research on this period of history, we have to assume that they're like heavily involved in this stuff. So Saadi Yassef, an Algerian FLN military commander who was literally involved in the events of these films, He wrote his memoir, on which the film is based, while he was a French prisoner. After independence, he became a leader in the new Algerian government. And in fact, he's still currently in the government as a senator. He plays the character Jafar in this film, who is kind of the character that gets our, I guess, protagonist, Ali Lapointe, drafts him into the resistance. It's not 100% clear how much the character is supposed to be based on the real person, but you follow me so far, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So the guy who did the shit wrote a memoir, and then a film was made about it, and then he got to play like a version of himself as an actor in the film.
Oh, wow, that's really cool.
Right.
You don't really get that. Anytime like a memoir is adapted, you don't get the actual person. Or
Yeah,
at
and
least
it's
they
possible
might
that
get a cameo. I
it's
know Tony Mendez was like an extra somewhere in Argo.
the Tony Mendez thing is a great way to think about it. It's almost as if like if Tony Mendez had just been renamed as Federico Sanchez,
Right.
then maybe it's just to distance himself. Maybe it's for legal reasons. Maybe it's because he's in politics. Or, well, yeah. It's possible that everything we see is, it's just a renaming of the character. And it's possible that some of the things are actually slightly different than what actually happened in history, but only slightly. Most of the characters are literally like just named as like they're just the names of the people that were actually involved. So maybe enough about him. Ali Lapointe, he's a historic figure, as well as Ben. Now some of these names are tough for me, but I'll do my best. Ben Mahidi, I'll spell it out too. It's Ben. Last name is M''Hidi. And that's the guy that was another one of the resistance leaders. That's the guy we see that was supposedly committed suicide in the film in French prison, but we have some doubts about that. That actually happened. One of our main amalgam characters is played by Jean Martin, and this is a theater actor who had lost his job. He'd been like kicked out of, I don't know, the Actors Guild or something, because he had signed the manifesto of the 121, which was like a big thing of like people in France coming out against the Algerian War and decrying French colonialism. Martin himself was a veteran. He served in a paratroop regiment during the Indochina War, where France was involved over there in Vietnam. And, he had come up again in the French resistance in World War II. So he's a perfect actor for the role that he plays as kind of like our villain with quotes around it. But be careful.
Well, he's the antagonist.
Yeah, this movie is definitely all about shades of gray.
Yeah, and Jean Martin is our boy from The Day of the Jackal. So that's another reason we wanted to pick this up, because there's quite a bit of overlap for this.
Specifically, the character in Day of the Jackal, he's kind of a minor character that Jean Martin plays. And even though like it's definitely not meant to be the same guy that we see in this movie, The Battle of Algiers, he's playing a fictional character that very well might have gotten to where he is in life after going through the events of Battle of Algiers, which again maps really nicely over the actor's personal experience itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Crazy cool. The three women in the film that we're about to talk about, the bomber ladies,
Yeah.
They're also, I was surprised to find like actual, every single one of them, historic figures. You can look them up on Wiki. Um, the movie constantly reminds you what day it is and even what time of day it is. And as far as I can tell, it at least 95% maps onto the historical record.
You brought up a lot of that when we were discussing, pre-recording stuff, and I looked into it as well, and yeah, it's crazy accurate. There's a lot of cinematic freedoms that's taken, as far as shots go, but as far as events that happen, it's like pretty much down to the T. It's really interesting. Like you don't really see that a lot in historical films.
Yeah, the film is, it turns out, amongst like film nerds and historians, this film is, I mean, it's almost like, makes me nervous tackling this topic once I found out just how much this movie like means to film historians, in its documentary-ish kind of style. Apparently, I guess that was something. It's an Italian film, by the way, but apparently that was like a movement in Italian cinema at the time. There are tons of directors that will cite this movie as just being like incredibly important in the development of the art of cinema. Number one, I mean, Stanley fucking Kubrick once told an associate that you literally cannot understand film unless you understand the Battle of Algiers.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Apparently, like it's just one of his favorite films. The Criterion Collection DVD include conversations with people like Oliver Stone, Steven Soderbergh, and Spike Lee. And
definitely
again,
gotta cop that then.
you alluded to earlier the fact that I mean, like in 2003, it was reported that the Pentagon had offered a screening of the movie as like almost like not a training video, I guess, but an example, a jumping off point for conversation for really talking about insurgency and counterinsurgency. And it's not just the Pentagon. We see reports like all over the place where, just departmental heads around the world that kind of have to deal with these issues of insurgency and counterinsurgency. They all know this movie like by heart. It's just that it's considered that important. It's crazy.
I definitely can see why. There's tons of things that you can pull, both mistakes and successful things, both on insurgents and counterinsurgents. So it's a big deal. I would say as a study piece.
Now, one thing I have to say about the film and the research on it is everywhere you look, it's stated that nobody in the film except Jean Martin is a professional actor, which I found very difficult to believe watching the
Right?
film. Don't you agree? I mean, these people really seem to
Absolutely.
know their shit.
Yeah, they hit their marks quite a bit. I mean, for the time, what I mean. It's kind of hard because I mean, like you can't really compare, the apples to oranges to like what we would think of acting now. But if you think of the time when the film came out, it's got that like very classic film type of dialogue and shot, progression.
And also
Um,
they're filming in Algeria where like so many of the people like don't have, at least in 1966, don't have like a strong tradition of filmmaking,
right.
and acting on screen. But what I read was like a lot of times he would just make them do like 20 or 30 takes and just aggressively like run out that just so much film and just take the best parts, and even to the point where he would like a lot of it looks to us, at least the version we looked at, like a lot of it looks dubbed, but that was apparently in the original version because like sometimes he would just like the line reading from one take but the performance of another take, and so he would just like dub it over onto that.
Oh, that's interesting. But now, when you found out that they were not professional actors, did they have military or insurgent or terrorist or revolutionary type of experience? Because that might be something they could have drawn off of and why they looked so well.
Well, that's, I think, what's so interesting about the casting of Jean Martin and Sadi Youssef. Those two guys in their real life had gone through, in Sadi's example, he'd gone through, literally lived through this movie. And right. In the case of Jean Martin, he had led a life and a military career that very closely maps onto the character that he's playing.
Yeah, I'm wondering if they had so much life experience, like it really just translated very well to the screen. As long as I'm sure they got trained on like hitting their marks type of thing. Like we were saying, like it's different when you're acting for a camera versus like on stage.
Sure.
I'm sure they got a little bit of training for hitting their marks, but in general, drawing out that character, which is what actors are trying to accomplish, I'm sure they had so much personal experience. It made it easier for them.
Definitely. And as far as like asking these non-actors to do, like I said, like sometimes 20 or 30 takes, I think really just, well, who knows how much they were paid for it. But I think really just speaks to the, these civilian Algerians that are being pressed into, acting in this movie, that they just really had so much commitment to wanting their story to be told that they were just putty in the director's hands. They would just do anything. Apparently, like I want to talk really quick about the crowd scenes in this movie, which are fucking amazing. And
yeah, absolutely. It's hard to do that in a film.
I think so.
Yeah.
And given that none of them have any experience, like it's even harder to imagine. But I read in on it a little, and I guess like they just like they wrote they drew all the lines of where everyone's supposed to move in chalk on the ground, and then just kept the camera level so you couldn't see that.
Right.
Yeah. It also okay, so we mentioned that the film has an astonishingly documentarian feel. And one of the things I noticed on my second watching of the film, as far as these people not being professional actors, I noticed like you do see a lot of people that are looking at the camera, which, you're not supposed to do. Right. In a film, right? You're supposed to say cut.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Get that person out of here. Fuck
right.
him. But they leave it in, and it really adds to the documentary feel, because in a when there's a camera there, you look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like in a big crowd. And you'll get a lot, like if you ever look at like documented footage of stuff, there's always someone looking at the camera, like, oh, there's a camera. Yeah.
And
like the dogs at the dog show, when you get the hunting group, they can spot the cameras in the whole building, and they always make a crack about it.
The film didn't get released in the U.S. Until a couple years later, I believe, but at the time of that theatrical release, it was actually felt necessary to add a title card at the front explaining to people that this is not a documentary because it
Really?
looks so much like one.
Yeah. It was filmed in black and white, which was a choice because color was around then. I know
Yeah,
we
that's what I read. Yeah.
um, and like for film, I guess majors or people that are trying to do film, this is definitely a good study for shooting, especially since such like milestone directors have mentioned it. But there's a lot of interesting style to it, and anybody that's really into classic film would probably enjoy this a lot. So don't just take this as just a tradecraft document, but also there's a lot of interesting filmmaking to be had. But other than that, let's definitely get in the tradecraft because I'm like I'm like squirming in my seat about this.
Retinal scan complete. Validating security clearance. Clearance granted. You may now enter the briefing room.
The film starts with kind of a jump to the future, where there's a guy being tortured and gives up a name, and we find out later it's Ali's location, and then the film kind of takes a step back to show the story of Ali. But one of the things I really liked was they didn't really show too much of the interrogation or like the beating in the interrogation, but
right. They just showed like the outcome.
the confession.
Yeah.
It kind of opens with the confession, and this plays to kind of Todd's point that it's hard to believe these aren't actors because the guy looked really, really like despairing and just like guilty and hates himself that he just confessed information about
I
his
might
brother.
use the word tortured.
This person does not like themselves at this point. Like at this point, they just sold out their brothers. And one of the things I really wanted to talk about, just for like real tradecraft, is this thing in interrogation. Like once this confession moment has happened, there's a thing about building up like esteem, like you did the right thing, don't worry, the hard part's over, blah blah blah. So it's kind of like a thing of confession sadness. So not only did this actor really portray the like guilt, like I just sold out my brother, and they look like they just got the shit beat out of them, but just the fact that in the film, the film just starts with deal with confession sadness.
I'd like to jump in too and mention that, like, again, even though we didn't see the torture itself, a lot of the French soldiers that supposedly like participated in the torture, they actually seem very forthcoming in their emotional relationship to him, in trying to comfort him and say like, hey, don't worry about it, man. You did the right thing. The hard part's over.
Yeah. Right.
Like you because they've done this before, and they actually, they're not doing it because they love doing it, not because they're sadists, but because their fucking job, and they've done it before, and they've seen this, what you're talking about, this confession sadness before, and their natural human impulse kicks in to try to comfort him as best they can.
They give him some water or whatever. I don't know what they gave him to drink.
Within the limits of their orders. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So we go back in time, though, to 1954.
It takes place in the Kashba, which is like the Muslim quarter of the city of Algiers, the capital of Algeria. When I heard it, my only thought was like, "Oh, rock the Kashba."
Right.
Apparently, like it's like kind of like a saying or like an idiom, I guess, of just like this type of area.
Right, but this is like, it's kind of like the valley that we live in, right? Like, I mean, there are many valleys on the planet Earth, but there's only one, the valley, and that's that's the one.
818.
Yeah.
Fuck Silicon. 818. San Fernando. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're the valley. And in
Right.
the same way, there are many Casbahs, but there's only one the Casbah. And that is the Muslim quarter of the city of Algiers, which is the capital of Algeria and where our movie takes place. We meet our protagonist, Ali, starting out, a little origin story, I guess.
Yeah.
Starts out as a petty criminal. He's running a 3-card Monte. The cops come after him like they do, when they see, I don't know. I don't know what the fucking, I've never actually understood what the cops' problem is with 3-card Monte games, but in every movie I've ever seen, the cops are like, no, you can't do that. Can't do that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, they're probably running a racket. 3-card Monte is known for one of those like fake gambling things, and you're taking away from official gaming, and those guys are not a group of people to mess with. So they're definitely going to sick the beat cops on them, type of thing.
Right. And usually my understanding is that like the cop is in on it, or like it's as soon as someone catches on and actually starts winning, that's when someone that you have planted in the crowd says, oh shit, the cops are coming. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And that's how you escape from like actually starting to lose money from someone that's on a hot streak or is caught on to like how you're actually manipulating the cards. But in this case, it looks like the cop interest is legit. Ali would have gotten away, but he gets tripped by a pretty boy Frenchie douchebag, kind of like
that guy looked like such a douchebag. Like
yeah.
best casting ever.
Central
no line,
casting. Central casting. I need a French frat boy.
Yeah. That guy looked more douchey than K-pop in our Samurai Spy episode.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like,
but that was a nice way to show like that shot, like just introduces you very early into the underlying racism, like
right.
Between the Muslims and the French.
And then Ali just jumps straight up and like headbutts the guy. Best headbutt ever.
It's a fucking great headbutt.
Yeah. Now in prison, he kind of becomes radicalized after, he's looking out the window and there's like a whole movement and they're bringing out the guillotine, which is like one of the best French tropes ever. Like, or like any type of uprising, like we're bringing out the fucking guillotine, guy. Like I loved it. But
yeah, I remember too, though, like when we were watching the film, like we were both like, wait, holy shit. Like we would have thought that the French would have a very negative cultural relationship with the guillotine. So we were surprised to see that executed.
Well, this is Italian made, right?
It is, yes, it is. But I mean, they're reflecting French sensibilities. And
I see.
I personally, I mean, I take the movie's word for it, but I was just really kind of shocked. Like, I'm not French, but I would have thought that a French person in, or French troops in 1966 would be like, yeah, that guillotine thing. Like, let's not do that anymore.
Right.
It's a crazy good scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie too. And not for the fact of the beheading itself, which we don't directly see, but that the camera shows us, it's like an interior courtyard of the prison, and the camera chooses to focus on the walls and all the hundreds of windows that we don't get to see the observers, but we know that they're watching, and
right.
and the movie is telling us like that they have no voice. They're watching what happens, but they don't get to say anything about it, or we don't get to see them or see their reactions. I thought that was like a just masterful little piece.
Yeah, it was really well shot. Not that I'm a
Powerful
shot
in a
expert.
surprising way.
Yeah, but like like when Plinkett says, like you're being fed information whether you know it or not, and it is very powerful. 5 months later, Ali gets released, and our little Omar comes and uses a code phrase to kind of recruit him. Um, we want to give plus 5 points on this, and especially me on this because we don't get to see a lot of targeting in spy films. They'll like mention it, like they'll just be like, "Oh yeah, this guy's kind of perfect," but I think it was really well developed because targeting is really important in recruitment for obvious reasons, and for something like this where you're an insurgent organization or a revolutionary organization or a terrorist organization, getting the guy that's down on his luck, who's out of prison, who is gonna like skirt the law or even break, and possibly could have some sort of radical ideas, or a young idealistic type of adolescent possibly, or just out of adolescence, perfect targeting. I really liked that Ali was our protagonist because we got to watch like the progression of his entire life throughout the entire story. Definitely plus 5 points on the targeting.
The opportunity that little Omar gives Ali is basically instructions to kill a cop, and it's specifically a cop that's collecting information from an Algerian informant. I think in reality that Yasef recruited Ali to kill the informant himself, but in this version of the film, he's assigned to kill the police man.
I wanted to mark this assassination as my number 3 worst tradecraft, because when Ali's ready to pull the trigger, he taps the cop on the shoulder. Like the old cowboy movies where they tap the guy on the shoulder, they turn around and he punches him. Like because you can't punch a guy from behind or something. It's one of these things, but he like screams at him and yells out like this whole like ideology, like this is what happens when you're a snitch type of thing, blah blah blah, and then he pulls the trigger. I really wanted to point out, I don't think you should scream at your target if you're trying to assassinate them. It's
That's
probably
a
a
good
bad idea. Yeah, but it turns out the gun is unloaded, and it's kind of weird, and it kind of screws up the whole thing. But we later find out that this was a plan for his recruitment to kind of test his loyalty. And I think Todd and I, you wanted to kind of discuss this. Like, was this a viable test for loyalty?
Yeah. So Jafar's explanation doesn't match what my concern is if I'm Ali. Now, first of all, Jafar explains, and I do like this, that the reason we targeted the cop instead of the snitch is because if we had told you to kill the snitch and you were actually for some reason like an informant yourself, you would have just done it. But if we told you to kill the cop and you were an informant, they wouldn't have let that happen, right? That part makes sense.
Oh yeah.
What I can't get to though, although I think I think you're gonna take this to a good place on this, is why is the gun unloaded? To my mind, just immediately watching it and after a little bit of reflection, in one situation, I mean, either way, the point is to prove Ali's loyalty. The main thing is to find out if he's going to pull the trigger.
Right.
Whether or not there's a bullet in the gun is kind of irrelevant. So why would you manage it in this way and pass Ali an unloaded gun? In one situation, you prove that he is willing to pull the trigger and you get a dead cop. In the other
Right.
situation, you still know that he's willing to pull the trigger, but you
Right.
don't get a dead cop.
Right. Uh, one thing I want to say is I definitely like share your concern, but more for a safety reason. One, because it's a cop and there's people on the street, so Ali could be identified later. Number one. Number two, the gun doesn't work. The cop's got a stick probably, and is trained. Versus Ali's just like fresh out of prison. So that's a big concern as far as safety. But when we discuss this, like, I think what they're going for is they don't want to start shooting cops until they're ready to get the plan in motion. And, the organization's just trying to recruit loyal people. So they don't want to ruffle any feathers because as soon as there's a dead cop on the street, there's going to be like a manhunt, right? Versus
Right.
somebody, right? And like as soon as bodies start hitting the floor, there's going to get noticed, right? And I'm thinking the purpose of this was one, like you had said, to determine whether or not he'll pull the trigger or he won't. But it wouldn't be a good idea to draw attention to the fact that something's going on.
Right. And so when we talked about this earlier, this is what I really liked about your thinking, because soon in the film, when they start shooting cops, like they don't just like shoot like a cop here or there, like one cop on Monday and we'll shoot another cop like 2 weeks from now, and then
Right.
maybe another on Thursday, just randomly.
Right.
When they start shooting cops, it's explicitly shown in the movie like they're doing like a massive coordinated, like you would in like a, I don't know if they have clans in GTA or whatever, but
Yeah.
like like it's all happening on the same day. And so what I think is like Jafar doesn't want that kind of bloodbath to happen until he can unleash his full bloodbath, like a massive push on one day. Right now, he just wants to find people that are willing to pull the trigger,
Right.
but not have the bodies on the floor yet.
Right.
So yeah, yeah, that makes sense to me. That helps me understand the unloaded gun. But it was a sticking point in my head. Next, before we get to that bloodbath that they're planning, I also wanted to just take a moment to talk about the at this point, that Ali is now recruited into the inner FLN circle. Part of their thing seems to be that they want to start punishing their own people that are morally corrupt. Remember like the scene where the kids beat up the drunk guy?
Yeah. Uh, there was a little bit of a voiceover for this, and it seems like they were blaming the French for like what would you call that? Like that base behavior, and we're the Algerians are like not all of them, but like like it's a majority of a Muslim culture, and so to have like a drunk guy on the street, that's like a big shame, I guess you would think. Um, like I guess you would think is like kind of like as much as like an uncultured American would, like this is a big deal for them. Like, so their blame on kind of the deterioration of the Algerian culture is because of the French.
Right.
So
I think that's part of it. Another part of it though goes back to, again, like people that can be converted, people that can be flipped, people that have vulnerabilities, for the French intelligence agencies to start getting information from people. We always talk about on this podcast, like our like in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, right?
Mhm.
You know, you're looking for the guy that's got an alcohol problem. You're looking for the guy that's got a debt problem. You're
Right.
looking for the secret homosexual. You're looking for the guy with a drug problem. Someone that's got something you can leverage against them.
Yeah, that's
And
the C in the big mice acronym that intelligence education would always talk about as far as recruitment goes, which is compromise. So something like that would definitely, like that's a really good point. They're just kind of like cleaning house, I guess.
right, which I mean, to my mind, like in the way in my very limited understanding, but I mean, I feel like I appreciate Muslim culture as much as I possibly can in my totally uninformed way. But like classically in our understanding is like there's a kind of a cultural purity that they
Mhm.
seem to take, like, well, not necessarily more seriously, but to greater levels, like cutting off people's hands for stealing, etc., etc.
Right.
Um, that feels, I don't know, kind of dirty and to watch. I don't like what they're doing, but on a tradecraft level, I think that they're also trying to, because they're also looking like they're going after the pimp, right?
Right.
In the prostitute district, we see Ali uh, verbally abusing, a drug addict and saying
Mhm.
like, "You got to clean your shit up, dude."
Right.
And it's not. I think I don't know. That's my discussion, or that's my possible tradecraft element. If it's not just cultural, but there's a tradecraft element to that of like we need to not have vulnerable people that can be
Oh yeah.
turned,
Right.
that have secrets, that have problems, that have like connections to bad shit that like the French could get their claws into.
Right.
When they do start shooting cops again, it seems like a massive organized, like citywide coordinated, just massive attack, and in the film we see that they're very specific about the dates and even the times of day that the events happen. And it's true that in June 20th, if you check wiki, that yeah, this is right about the time that there was a very big uptick in violence in Algeria. Uh, Plus spy points for, I like the way that they used their first killing as kind of a ruse for, quote unquote witnesses to the killing to be
Right.
ushered into the police station where, yeah, where they could again make a secondary attack and grab some higher caliber weapons.
Yeah. It was definitely a good play to kind of, that's a guerrilla tactic, is using the machine to kind of feed you what you need. Um, and any book or I guess manual on guerrilla tactics that you've ever read or found or video, it's always talking about the agility of a smaller organization against the machine. Like the machine's got the resources and the power. Uh, so what you kind of do is use them to feed what you need. It was definitely a good point on how insurgents operate. as far as like climbing up the ladder rather than the big machine having to go down the ladder. Yeah, it's this, I guess, dance. But I still want to complain about the sneaks in this movie. Worst sneaks ever. Uh, like there was the one where the cop got stabbed, and
Mm-hmm.
like the
Yeah.
guy's like I don't know, probably like exactly 12 inches behind him. Like I'd be like, what are you doing? Like, can I help you? And you're an officer. Like you'd be like, bro, what are you doing? Get off my face. Like, you know, you're obviously trained for safety out in the field. Like, get out of here. Like, what are you doing? One of the head police guys is harried by his superiors, but he doesn't have like enough men to kind of follow up on the attacks. It's interesting. Like, you know, I feel like people that aren't of means, I guess, believe that those that are have an infinite amount of means. And it really shows that no, like a lot doesn't mean infinite. Like there is still um like a limit to those resources.
Right. Yeah, I
Especially
think
on the lower level.
that's the insurgents' dilemma, or that's their problem to solve. That's a
Mhm.
great point. Is to demonstrate that yeah, that they're not infinitely powerful. They're more powerful than us, but they're not infinitely. There's a limit to their power. And that's what the
Right.
insurgent seeks to demonstrate. What a great point, Dave.
uh, but you know what they start doing on Team France is setting up barbed wire and checkpoints around the Casbah, and you know, plus coin points on this is like containing the area. The film really shows it as like a very oppressive move, and I think in today's standards, it would definitely be viewed as very oppressive. But the purpose of this would be containing the situation, even though we'll see later that it doesn't really contain the situation. One of the reasons why it can't be contained is, and this really plays on the racism or stereotyping of the Algerian slash Muslim culture. There's a woman that's trying to get through the checkpoint and they want to like frisk her, and she's like, "Don't touch me, don't touch." Well, she's screaming Arabic, and you don't get a subtitle for this. Uh, but you know, one of the other officers is like, "You're not allowed to touch women." But we later find out that she's like hiding a gun under her garments. So the definitely plus spy points on the hidden weapons. Um, uh, you know, and this kind of leads to more continued attacks on the police.
Yeah. Continuing to attacks on the police, and then this one, we get this little subplot. Uh, I didn't exactly understand it. It seemed like the French police station chief of some area. It seemed like, he's getting yelled at by his superiors, like, you got to stop these killings, you got to crack down, and he doesn't seem to, or I mean, I don't know if it's, we don't get to know a lot about him. Like I said, like he only gets a very short sequence here, but his response is to go to, recruit like a bunch of his, I don't know, French socialite friends, and use his authority to get into the Casbah late at night and do their own bombing. Which I don't know. I wasn't really sure what that sequence was meant to signify.
Mhm.
I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. It just seemed to me like to maybe be meant to demonstrate that, he feels like his hands are tied and he has to resort to bullshit tactics in response to bullshit tactics. Am I making any
What
sense
I really
here?
like about this is before this like counter bombing, um, I, like I really wanted to. I guess we could call this like high society terrorists.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
whatever.
mean, it's like a country club that he goes to recruit his little cabal.
Yeah, and the idea is that there's all these kind of like terrorist actions. Well, I guess we haven't really gotten into terrorism at this point. Well, I guess it is. Yeah, I mean, like they're killing cops. So yeah, and the purpose is to instill fear and sway political opinion. Um, but there hasn't been any bombings yet, I guess. So the idea is that there's like a what is he, a diplomat, or is he kind of like a police chief? I'm not really sure who he
I think
is.
he seems to be like a police chiefy kind of guy. I'm
Right.
pretty comfortable just calling him a police chief.
Yeah, and so it's just like our boys are being killed. It was kind of like there was that lady police officer that got indicted and convicted, and then one of the witnesses were murdered. It's kind of like the boys in blue, like showing up for their team type of thing. So like this chief, he's at this like high society like party, and starts recruiting people. So it's and this goes back to like our Munich episode where shit, I forgot his name. What was that? But that guy was like a really like classy type of wealthy terrorist, right? Like it's not like terrorism only exists on like one side, or these terrible acts of violence exist on one. Like it comes back and forth. It's kind of like you do this, we do this. The the trap of cycling through the you did this, I'm going to do this. Oh, okay, well, I did this, so you're going to do this type of thing. But one of the things is he gets like through the checkpoint because of his credentials, and I don't know. It's really hard to unpack this scene because I'm not sure what they were going for, because it kind of felt a little out of place.
As I'm thinking about it right now, I kind of have a theory. I just noticed like this is actually the first bombing of civilians,
Right?
because you just mentioned like the Algerians haven't gotten into, like, they're shooting cops, and that's it's what it is.
Yeah,
But
it's
they
a
haven't,
terrible thing to do, but they haven't blown
but
up
they haven't yet
100.
like bombed civilians, and it just now
Right.
occurs to me that this rogue French police chief, as we're calling him, he's actually the first person that institutes like an actual, what I would call an actual terrorist attack. Like he bombs, like he explodes an Algerian household within the Casbah. Now, I didn't
And it's not just a household; it's kind of like a flats. Or
Oh
like
yeah, It's, I mean,
this is like a rundown building of small apartments.
oh, the
Like
destruction is massive, and
yeah,
we see that. Now I didn't, in my research, I didn't find any evidence that this guy existed. This guy might be purely fictional, and this just might here's my theory, might have been like a director's choice of, because the directors were always highly interested in showing that like both sides were bad.
right.
And so, because we're gonna see very soon that the Muslims are gonna start bombing civilians, maybe they just wanted to show, and God forgive me if I've got this wrong, and it was really the French that, some French rogue dude. Like, if this was historic, I'd love to hear it. I just didn't find any evidence of it. But showing him being willing to employ methods of mass destruction and terrorism against civilians, French versus the Muslims first, it slightly justifies what comes next, which is more eye for an eye, and I use justify very loosely.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
because nobody's clean in this movie.
Yeah,
But
it's a
I
difficult
guess,
topic to talk about, and it's definitely, I guess viewer discretion advised because we're gonna get in some pretty heavy topics coming up.
yeah.
Not that killing cops isn't a heavy topic, but
It's
like
not. I mean,
like
it's
right. Yeah, we're not saying it's okay to kill cops at all. We're trying to figure out what's going on, not only from a tradecraft perspective, but also as a storytelling perspective, because it's very important that we talk about the storytelling perspective because there's actually a really good back and forth on this later in the film.
right. And yeah, and at the end of this episode, for sure, I want to have that discussion with you about does do these tactics work? Not We're not having a discussion about whether or not they're good or bad. There's no more, we're not putting any moral emphasis on this. We're just at the end of the day, this movie is just fucking shit sucks.
Right.
and people suck.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, please don't go out and bomb please don't go and shoot a cop and say it's because I heard that Spies Like Us podcast said that was a valid tactic.
Right.
Please. We're coming up on my very favorite part though, because we are gonna start seeing some Algerians plant some bombs and start, so again, I'll just really again put a tick in this thing. I really don't understand that whole police chief sequence, except that it might have been some kind of balancing act on the directors to try to keep making sure we both thought both sides were equally bad.
Right.
I know that I noted at this point that Ali gets the message from I'm gonna skip that part because that doesn't make
All right, hold
sense.
on, let me respond. Hold on. If we're gonna hold on.
Okay.
Both equally bad. I actually looked into the Algerian, I guess, battle for independence, and there's quite a bit of evidence that the French forces did really shitty stuff. So the terrorist response wasn't exactly unwarranted. Not that it's okay, but it's probably a director's choice to give us something for the audience to accept.
I agree. I agree 100%.
Because you can't go through all of the things that an enormous French military occupation colony situation would have pissed off those people and still told the entire story of this film. That's a whole nother story, right? So it's probably a time constraint, I would say, because I'm sure just from what I've read, there's a lot of terrible things, but that's another narrative to have to pull out. So it might have been all right, let's have this rogue police chief bomb innocent people, and it'll have the impact emotionally with an audience. And this is very helpful tradecraft wise to kind of point out because I'm really excited to get to the press conference later. So please don't miss the press conference part.
We will not miss out on the press conference, but it's going to have to wait for part 2 of this episode.
As always, the best way to make sure you don't miss out on that is to hit the subscribe button on iTunes, Google, or your favorite podcast app. Also, you can find updates on our Facebook page or website, spieslikeus.net. And please, if you can help us out, give us some feedback. We're always trying to improve the show, and your thoughts would be a big help. So last episode, our brush pass, I stated that Judas received 18 pieces of silver, but it was actually 30 pieces of silver. So I just wanted to make that correction. And please stop yelling at me. Thank you.
The preceding transmission sampled the songs Ice Cold by Audionautics, Enter the Party by Kevin MacLeod, and sound effects from freesound.org. Attributions and links are found at spieslikeus.net. Editing by Todd Hostetler.